The house looked smaller than he remembered. Maybe it was the silence, the kind that makes every clock tick sound louder, every breath feel heavier. When Eli stepped inside, the scent of old wood and tea leaves wrapped around him like something fragile, half forgotten. His father's slippers were still by the doorway, untouched, the way his stepmother, Clara, had left them. She was standing in the living room when he arrived, poised but weary, her posture straight as if she'd been holding herself together for weeks. At 42, Clara carried beauty in quiet ways, the soft lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her hair fell in loose curls over her shoulders, the calmness she wore even when her hands trembled slightly. Eli was 26, not a boy anymore, but suddenly he felt like one again in that house. The last time he had stood in that room, his father had been alive, sitting in that same armchair, laughing at something Clara said. Now, the space between them was filled with ghosts. "Welcome home," Clara said finally, her voice smooth but subdued. He nodded. "Thanks. I didn't think I'd ever come back here." They shared a pause, not uncomfortable, but loaded with the unspoken. She gestured toward the hallway. "Your old room's still there." I didn't touch anything." That small confession hit deeper than she probably intended. He could tell she hadn't just preserved the room, she'd preserved everything. His father's memory, their marriage, even the faint smell of aftershave in the bathroom. Time had stopped inside these walls. As he carried his bag upstairs, Eli noticed how different the air felt, still, like the house itself was holding its breath. He heard Clara moving in the kitchen, the gentle clatter of plates, the kettle beginning to hum. It was domestic, ordinary, and yet something inside him stirred with an ache he couldn't name. That evening, they ate together, quietly, respectfully, as though the empty chair at the table demanded reverence. She asked about his work, his life in the city. He answered politely, avoiding her eyes at first, until he caught a glimpse of sadness softening her features. It wasn't just grief, it was loneliness, layered and deep. After dinner, Clara went to the piano in the corner of the room and played a simple melody, something slow, wistful. Eli stood in the doorway, listening. The sound filled the house again, and for the first time, it didn't feel hollow. When she noticed him watching, she smiled faintly. He used to say I played better when someone was listening. Eli's throat tightened. Then, maybe I'll listen more often. The moment hung there, delicate, human, fragile. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. But there was something in the air, something that lived in the quiet spaces between grief and gratitude. And though neither of them knew it, that silence would soon become the most dangerous thing of all. The evening light stretched long across the hallway, thin gold spilling through the half-closed blinds. Eli was heading to his room with a towel over his shoulder after washing the dishes. The house was quiet, that kind of silence that made every creak in the floorboards sound like a voice. Clara had gone upstairs earlier, saying she was tired, and he assumed she was resting. But as he reached the landing, he noticed something. Her bedroom door was slightly ajar. From inside came the faint rustle of fabric and the muted sound of drawers opening. He paused only for a second, not out of curiosity, but habit. The door had never been opened before. Clara kept that space private, sacred almost. Through the small gap, he saw her standing by the dresser, back turned, half-shadowed by the lamp's glow. She was brushing her hair, wearing a pale silk slip, the kind that caught light in quiet ways. There was nothing overt in the moment, no intention, no performance. Just a woman alone, unguarded, believing no one could see her grief made visible in gestures. Eli froze. The sight wasn't indecent, it was intimate in a way that felt wrong precisely because it was so human. He wasn't watching her body, he was watching the fragility in her shoulders, the heaviness in her movements, as though every small action cost her strength. He meant to turn away, he even took a step back, but then she looked up into the mirror. Her eyes found him. A second of stillness. Then another. Her hand stopped midair. Her lips parted, just slightly, shock flickering across her face before she turned and closed the door, gently but decisively. Eli stood there for several seconds longer, heart pounding. The house suddenly felt alive with his own guilt. He wanted to knock, to explain, to apologize. But what could he possibly say? I wasn't spying. I just saw too much. He retreated to his room, shutting the door softly, his reflection in the dark window staring back at him, ashamed, confused, and painfully aware that something irreversible had happened in a moment that lasted less than 5 seconds. Down the hall, Clara sat on the edge of her bed, her breath uneven. She pressed her hands to her chest as though trying to calm her heartbeat. Shame came first, then fear, not of him, but of herself. Because deep down, beneath the shock, there was a feeling she didn't want to name. She had felt seen. Not as a widow or as a caretaker, but as a woman. Neither of them spoke that night. At breakfast the next morning, the air between them was different. She didn't meet his eyes. He didn't ask if she slept well. Every motion, the pouring of coffee, the clinking of spoons, was careful, deliberate. It wasn't distance born of anger. It was the kind of distance that comes when two people have accidentally crossed an invisible line and are terrified of where that awareness might lead. Days passed, slow and uneven, as though the air itself was learning how to move around their silence. Clara began waking earlier than usual. By the time Eli came downstairs, she would already be dressed, her hair pinned neatly, her face calm behind a mask of composure. She spoke less, smiled only when necessary, and kept her eyes busy with the sink, the laundry, the garden, anywhere but him. Eli noticed everything. He noticed how she no longer lingered in the kitchen when he made coffee, how she would leave the living room the moment he entered. He noticed, too, the faint tremor in her voice when she did have to speak to him, polite, controlled, almost brittle. One morning, he tried to break the wall between them. I'm heading into town, he said, standing near the back door. Do you need anything? She didn't look up from the cutting board. No, thank you. Her tone was kind but distant, the kind that ends a conversation before it starts. Eli hesitated. He wanted to say something, to apologize, to explain that what happened wasn't what she thought. But every word that came to mind sounded wrong, smaller than the weight of that moment they both remembered. So he just nodded and stepped outside, letting the screen door click softly behind him. In the evenings, they still shared meals, but even those felt rehearsed. They filled the quiet with weather, news, recipes, anything safe. But beneath the surface, the memory of that glance burned quietly between them, neither of them daring to touch it. At night, Eli would lie awake listening to the faint hum of her movements down the hall, the sound of drawers closing, footsteps pacing, sometimes the low, ghostly hum of her voice as she whispered to herself. He wondered if she was thinking of him, too, or if she was just haunted by her own reflection in the mirror. A week later, it rained. The kind of steady, heavy rain that blurred the world into soft motion. Clara was in the kitchen when he came in, soaked, holding a bag of groceries. She looked up briefly, eyes widening when she saw how drenched he was. You'll catch cold, she said automatically, reaching for a towel. For the first time in days, she touched him, a brief, careful press of fabric to his hair. That touch undid them both. It wasn't tender, exactly, it was startled. But for an instant, her hand lingered. Their eyes met again, and the same current from that night flickered alive, unspoken but undeniable. She pulled back first, pretending to fold the towel, pretending it meant nothing. I'll make tea, she murmured. Eli just nodded, watching her hands shake slightly as she filled the kettle. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It had shape and heat, and both of them knew, no matter how carefully they tried to ignore it, that something fragile was beginning to grow in that quiet, and it would not go away on its own. The rain had lasted 3 days straight, blurring mornings and evenings into the same shade of gray. The house smelled of damp wood and boiled tea. By the 4th night, Eli couldn't sleep. He wandered downstairs, drawn by the faint melody of a piano coming from the living room. Clara was there in her nightgown, shoulders bare under a light shawl, sitting before the piano as though she'd been waiting for someone who never came. The lamp on the table cast a soft, golden pool of light that stopped just short of the window, leaving the rest of the room in gentle shadow. Eli hesitated at the doorway. I didn't know you still played this late. She didn't turn around. I haven't in a while. Her voice was quiet, almost lost beneath the rain tapping against the glass. But sometimes, when it rains like this, I hear him. He understood without her saying more. His father. Eli stepped closer, leaning on the piano's edge. He used to play with you. She smiled faintly, still looking at the keys. He'd sit here and hum off key just to annoy me. Her smile faltered, the memory catching in her throat. Now I keep waiting for that sound, but it never comes. For a moment, she stopped playing and let her fingers rest on the ivory. Her hands looked small and tired in the light, a soft tremor in the tips of her fingers. Eli said quietly, "I'm afraid of forgetting his voice." Clara turned then slowly, like someone startled by her own heartbeat. "You won't," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You'll forget the sound of it maybe, but not what it felt like when he spoke to you." He met her eyes. They were glistening, not just from tears, but from recognition, the kind that comes when two people realize they're carrying the same weight. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his hand resting on the piano. It was meant to comfort, to steady him, but something in that touch lingered longer than comfort should. The warmth between their palms spread slowly, deliberately, neither of them pulling away. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For not pretending." Her eyes softened. Sometimes pretending is the only way to survive. They stayed like that, hands still, breathing in the same rhythm, surrounded by rain and memory. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even deliberate. It was the kind of closeness that forms when grief stops being private, when it becomes something shared, something alive. Then the clock in the hallway struck midnight, startling them both. Clara gently withdrew her hand, looking down. "It's late," she said, her voice barely a breath. Eli nodded, though his body felt heavy with something unnamed. As he climbed the stairs, the echo of her piano followed him, slow, fragile notes unraveling in the quiet house. And for the first time since his father's death, Eli felt both comforted and haunted, as if he'd touched something sacred that wasn't his to hold. Summer was beginning to fade. The mornings had turned cooler and the garden outside had lost some of its brightness. Inside, the house felt quieter than ever, not the comforting kind of quiet, but the kind that presses on your chest. Eli had grown used to the rhythm of their strange coexistence, brief conversations, shared meals, accidental touches that both pretended not to notice. But lately, Clara had changed again. She avoided even the smallest traces of closeness. She no longer played piano in the evenings. Her smiles, when they came, felt borrowed. It was on a Tuesday when everything finally cracked. A neighbor dropped by, Mrs. Leone, a cheerful woman with too much curiosity and too little restraint. Clara served her tea in the front garden while Eli trimmed the hedge nearby. He wasn't listening at first, but his name drifted through the air like an unexpected chord. "Your stepson's quite the young man now," Mrs. Leone said, laughing. "I hardly recognized him, such a handsome boy." "You must have your hands full." Clara's polite laughter faltered for a heartbeat. "He's been a great help," she said carefully. "It's been good having him here." When the neighbor left, Clara's composure slipped. Eli noticed it as soon as he came in, the way her eyes darted away, the sudden stiffness in her shoulders. "Did something happen?" he asked. She turned to face him, arms crossed as though bracing herself. "We need to talk." Her tone was calm but trembling underneath. He waited, silent. "People notice things," she began. "They talk." "I can't," she stopped, pressing a hand to her temple. "I can't let them think there's something here that shouldn't be." Eli's chest tightened. "There isn't," he said, though he knew it wasn't entirely true. She looked at him then, really looked, and the truth between them filled the room like smoke. "You don't see how this looks," she whispered. "You're young, you're kind, and she shook her head. "I'm supposed to protect what's left of this family, not ruin it." Eli took a step forward. "You're not ruining anything, Clara. I care about you. That's all this is. I care." She let out a soft, broken laugh. "You sound just like him when you say that." "Like who?" "Your father." The name landed like a stone between them. She covered her mouth with her hand, suddenly trembling. "You remind me of him so much that sometimes I forget he's gone. And then I hate myself for it." Eli wanted to reach for her, to tell her she didn't need to apologize for feeling. But he stayed where he was, his fingers gripping the back of a chair. "I don't want to lose what's left of you," he said softly. Clara closed her eyes. "Then help me keep the distance, Eli. Please." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of rain. Neither of them moved. The words they'd said could never be unsaid, and yet neither could the silence that followed, a silence that now carried the sound of two hearts breaking quietly in the same rhythm. The storm came without warning, a sudden, violent downpour that swallowed the power lines and drowned the house in darkness. Thunder rolled through the valley, shaking the windows, and the whole place felt as if the world had stopped breathing. Eli lit a single candle on the kitchen counter. The small flame painted the walls in amber, flickering against the framed photographs of his father. He stood there for a long moment, staring at one picture in particular, Clara and his father laughing in the garden, sunlight caught in her hair. Then he heard footsteps. Clara appeared in the doorway, holding another candle. Her face was pale, her expression unreadable. She was wearing a loose gray sweater over her nightclothes, her hair pulled back loosely, strands escaping around her face. "Are you all right?" Eli asked. She nodded, though her eyes lingered on the window, where the rain ran down like glass veins. "I never liked storms," she said softly. "He used to hold my hand when they got bad. I keep forgetting he isn't here anymore." Eli's voice was quiet. "You don't have to keep pretending you're fine." Her lips pressed together, a silent defense that dissolved almost immediately. "If I stop pretending, I won't know what's left of me," she said, her voice shaking. He took a careful step forward. The candlelight flickered between them, throwing shadows across the kitchen tiles. "Then maybe you don't have to do it alone," he said. For a long time, she didn't answer. She just stood there, watching the flame dance, her breath uneven. Then, almost like a surrender, she whispered, "Eli, when I see you, I feel alive again. And I hate myself for it." The words hit him like thunder. Not because they were romantic, but because they were raw, a wound exposed under candlelight. He set his candle down slowly, the wax pooling at its base. "You don't need to hate yourself for being human," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't see you as forbidden. I just see someone who deserves to be seen, to be cared for." Her eyes shimmered with tears. She shook her head, whispering, "You're too kind. And you're too lonely." That broke something. A quiet sob escaped her before she could stop it. He moved instinctively, stepping closer, not touching, just near enough for her to feel his presence. She hesitated, then leaned forward, resting her forehead against his shoulder. He stood there, frozen, then lifted a trembling hand to her back, not to pull her closer, just to steady her. She wept softly, the sound barely louder than the storm. They stayed like that for a long time, two people bound by loss, by confusion, by something tender they didn't know how to name. When the lights finally flickered back on, they stepped apart without a word. But in that silence, both of them knew something had shifted. The boundary they had fought to protect had already been crossed, not in touch, but in truth. And the hardest part was knowing that no amount of distance could ever make them unfeel it. The storm passed before dawn, leaving behind a thin mist that clung to the garden. The world felt washed clean, but inside the house, everything carried the weight of what could not be undone. Eli woke early. The power had returned, yet he kept the lights off. Morning sunlight filtered through the kitchen curtains, warm and quiet. He brewed coffee the way Clara liked it, strong, with a hint of milk, and waited without quite knowing why. When she entered, barefoot, still wrapped in that same gray sweater from the night before, he looked up. Her face was calm, but her eyes betrayed a deep exhaustion, as though she had wrestled with herself through the night. Neither of them spoke at first. The only sounds were the soft hiss of the kettle and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Finally, Clara said, "About last night." He turned toward her slowly, his throat tight. "You don't have to explain," he said. But she shook her head. "I do. Because if I don't, we'll both carry it forever in silence." She sat at the table, hands clasped, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her cup. "Eli, you reminded me what it feels like to be seen. To be cared for." I forgot that part of myself after your father passed. You brought it back. Her voice trembled. But I can't ask you to bear that. It isn't fair to you. He wanted to tell her that he didn't care about fair. That what he felt wasn't obligation, it was connection, pure and uncalculated. But he saw the way her shoulders trembled, the way she avoided his eyes, and he understood. This wasn't rejection. It was mercy. He nodded, finally, quietly. Then let's just remember it as something honest, he said. Not wrong. Just something that mattered. Clara looked up then, truly looked at him, and there was gratitude in her gaze, and something deeper, softer. You're a good man, Eli, she whispered. I hope you never lose that. She reached across the table and laid her hand over his. For a moment, everything stood still, the warmth of her skin, the way her fingers curled slightly against his, as if memorizing the shape of him. Then she let go. By afternoon, the house was filled with ordinary sounds again, dishes clinking, birds outside, the hum of a normal day. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Eli packed his bags that evening, quietly, methodically. He didn't know where he was going yet, only that he had to leave while the memory was still gentle, before time turned it into something sharper. As he stepped outside, Clara stood at the door, arms folded, a faint smile trembling on her lips. Take care of yourself, she said. He looked back one last time. You too. The road ahead shimmered under the soft light of sunset. Behind him, the house stood still, holding the silence of everything that had been felt but never spoken. And though they had chosen distance, both of them knew love wasn't always meant to be lived. Sometimes, it was enough that it had existed at all.